Now, interim uMkhonto weSizwe youth leader Bonginkosi Khanyile is adamant that there won't be elections in South Africa if the party is not allowed to contest the 29th of May elections. He also declared anarchy if the Electoral Commission or the courts decide not to allow the face of Jacob Zuma on the ballot paper. Meanwhile, the Electoral Court will on Tuesday hear an application by the ANC on registration and usage of its trademark uMkhonto weSizwe by the new party. Now, to help us unpack the ramifications of this political hot potato is political analyst Professor Bheki Mngomezulu. Professor Mngomezulu, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, anarchy, that is what the Youth League leader of uMkhonto weSizwe party is saying. Now, I mean, have we reached that point where we can make such statements and there be no repercussions?
If you can speak louder, please.
Hi, Professor Mngomezulu, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Awesome. I was just asking to say that, you know, the interim uMkhonto weSizwe Youth League leader, Bonginkosi Khanyile, says he's declaring anarchy should they not get what they want. I mean, shouldn't there be some sort of repercussion for these kinds of statements?
Thank you very much for the question, my sister, and thank you for having me, and good evening to your viewers. There are a couple of issues with the statement made by Khanyile. One, the MK is supposed to take action and then talk to him privately, not in public, not in the media, but privately, to indicate to him that the statements that he has made might in fact tarnish the image of the party. So that is one thing that is supposed to happen at that level. But then secondly, I'm not particularly impressed by the fact that the president immediately responded to this. Because whenever the president addresses the nation, all of us have to listen and listen attentively. But then if the president has to respond in public on each and everything that people are saying, I don't think it's good for his office. The least he could do would be to write a statement through his spokesperson, Vincent Magwenya, and then indicate that they are aware of these allegations or these talks, and then, of course, they are calming the nation, that everyone should allow the law to take its course, as it were, and then leave it there. But the third most important thing for me is, was it really necessary for the ANC to take this matter to court? More especially given that in the history of this country, there's never been a party called MK Party. There was a MK which was formed on the 16th of December 1961, which was a military wing of the ANC. But then on the build-up to the election, all the military wings were disbanded, including MK, including APLA, and many others. So then the question becomes, if those parties or those military wings were disbanded, and then somebody picks up two words from that from one of those organizations and then calls it a party, does it really reflect exactly what happened in 1961? I'm not too sure. It's for the court to decide. But honestly speaking, from where I'm standing, the situation we find ourselves in right now could have been avoided. And Mr. Khanyile is also not assisting in the matter. So no one for me is in the clear as far as this issue is concerned.
Now, Prof, speaking of, you know, this name as well, and you're saying basically they shouldn't have even taken this matter to court about contending for this MK name. But, you know, those who are in the governing party may then say, you know, the uMkhonto weSizwe name kind of pulls at the heartstrings of certain South Africans, considering that it was part of the liberation movement as well. And closely linked to that symbolism is the ANC. So they would feel that they kind of own this term and this word.
The same thing happened in 2009 with regards to COPE. COPE was taken to court for the same reason, the argument being that COPE, which was formed, which basically was a precursor to the establishment of or the adoption of the Freedom Charter in 1955 in Kliptown, Soweto. So this case went to court, and then, of course, at that time, the ANC lost. This time around, one would have expected that the least they could have done would be to discuss with the MK leaders secretly, not to take this issue to court. Unless someone were to convince me and say that they've exhausted that option, they've negotiated with the founders of MK, and they couldn't find each other, and then as a last resort, they decided to go to court. Then I'll be convinced. But as things stand at the moment, my understanding is that in the history of this country, like I was saying, there's never been uMkhonto weSizwe party. Let's say, hypothetically speaking, they decided to call it uMkhonto weSizwe and not uMkhonto weSizwe. Would that be an issue? Because there's never been uMkhonto weSizwe, but there was uMkhonto weSizwe. If they had said uMkhonto weSizwe, but still call it MK, would that be a problem?
Professor, let's move to this threat that was made this week as well. Now, this newly formed MK party already seems to be causing quite a stir for some existing political parties, but particularly for the governing party as well. These threats that were made, should this be something that we all as South Africans should be taking seriously, or can they just be rubbish? But not just as South Africans, is this something that the SAPS should be taking far more seriously?
You know what, my sister? I've always made the statement that you don't have to respond to everything that is said by members of the public. For instance, the statements that are made by Khanyile, ordinarily I would have just ignored them and they would have died a natural death. That is what I would have done. But in the event that you want to do something about it, you follow the processes that I've just outlined. One, you reason with the leadership of the organization and say, talk to your member, because the statements that he's making might in fact cause havoc and might lead to unnecessary bloodshed. But the issue for me is that you don't have to discuss that in public. Do that clandestinely and then handle the matter without giving Mr. Khanyile more airtime. Because what is happening now, people are just popularizing Mr. Khanyile, because the fact that even the president has commented on this issue means that Khanyile now is a force to be reckoned with. Of course, the statement could be dangerous. I agree with you on that one. It could be dangerous, more especially given that it's happening in KwaZulu-Natal. And of course, we know what happened in 2021 when the former president was taken to jail. Then the country then was negatively affected. So the same could happen. So given that history, then anyone who takes this matter seriously would be justified in that context. But how you handle the issue is what matters for me, rather than handling the issue itself. Because if you do this in public, you are basically saying that Khanyile must come and defend himself. You bring in SAPS, they go public about it. Why would they do that? Because they can still do this thing behind the scenes, handle the matter and let it die down, and then allow the court process on the other hand to take its course. Because once the ANC has made this litigation against MK, obviously the courts have no choice but to listen to the matter and then make a determination. In the meantime, everyone has to wait for that decision. Once the decision is made, then it will be binding. But then I think the issue is not okay. It was not okay for Khanyile to make the statements he made, but how we have responded is not how we should have done it.
I guess, just coming off those July unrests that you also, those riots as well in KwaZulu-Natal that you just made mention of, many South Africans are still kind of once bitten, twice shy. So the thought of something like that happening again is quite daunting. And also considering that some sects of that province haven't fully recovered from those riots as well. So one can understand the concern around that, even though it is also giving much more airtime to this interim MK leader, youth league leader as well. But also speaking of him, I want to talk about the politics of it all. Now, this MK interim youth leader was also a protester during Fees Must Fall. As we know, he spent time behind bars for that, protesting at the time against the government that President Jacob Zuma led at the time as the president of the country. Now, fast forward, almost a decade later, the very same person is saying he's willing to lay his life on the line. But I guess is this just politics?
My sister, history is not stagnant. History keeps moving. At the time that you are referring to, Khanyile was a student, and it was within his right to defend the rights of the students as a student leader. So there was nothing wrong about that. There was nothing untoward about that. Maybe the manner in which he did it is what landed him in jail. But in principle, fighting for the fate of the students is what any other student leader would do under normal circumstances. And it doesn't really matter whether the president is former President Jacob Zuma, former President Thabo Mbeki, or the current President Cyril Ramaphosa. If you have an issue that affects the students and you call yourself a student leader, we have no choice but to defend the students, or at least to carry their plight and then try to reason with the leadership. Right now, he's no longer a student, but he's a youth leader of uMkhonto weSizwe, a political party. So it doesn't really matter whether he's now on the side of the former president, and as in his own words, he's prepared to lay his life for the sake of the former president. That is his statement as a politician and no longer as a student leader. So the contexts are different. So for me, it's not an issue that is making this statement in defense of the current of the former president, and also defending someone who was once on the other side of the table with during his student years. But the statement itself, regardless of whether it is in defense of MK or in defense of the former president or even in defense of the current president, for me it's neither here nor there. The point is the statement should not have been made. Now that the statement has been made, we have to show leadership and not to handle this issue badly. Because this is the same thing that we did in 2021. I still maintain that the riots in 2021 or the unrest could have been avoided if we had done things the right way. But then the manner in which we handled that situation led us to where we are right now. Like we were saying, some people are still recovering from that. Some businesses did not recover. Some people lost their family members. So then we don't want something like that happening. If we are reckless this time around, we might end up in the same situation. Like threatening that we are going to send soldiers to contain the situation. Then it means you are already saying that you want to be reactive as opposed to taking proactive measures and try to contain the situation now rather than later.
Now, before I let you go, Prof, it feels a little bit like deja vu with a leader facing rape charges, still running for political office, taking us back to that start of the Zuma presidency. Now, when we look at the leaked MK candidates list, which included the likes of rape-accused Bishop Stephen Zondo, what do you make of that, and how do we know that it won't end up like last time?
For starters, it's regrettable that the list of the ANC and the list of the MK were both leaked. It's very unfortunate. But then the positive thing we can take out of this is that the IEC has handled the matter correctly. And that is the kind of leadership that I'm saying that we need in this country, especially in times like this. And that is one point. The second point is this issue of saying that if you were once on the wrong side of the law, therefore you should not stand office. That is a good principle. But then if a political party does not have that in its selection methods, then you cannot rule someone out. The ANC has taken a decision that if you are implicated in wrongdoing, you will be excluded from the list that goes to Parliament. But you and I know that at the moment, some people might appear. We don't have the official list yet. But then some people might appear, and then others would say, let us look at the choice of words. Are we saying that someone who's tainted must not be in that list? Or are we saying that someone who's facing formal charges must not be in that list? Or are we saying that someone who has done wrong, even if that person has not been charged, must not be in that list? Or are we saying that only those who have been found guilty must not be in that list? So there is still a conversation that needs to happen, even in the ANC, with all the good things that it is trying to do. Then with the MK and other political parties, I've not heard them saying that if you are found on the wrong side of the law, you will not make it in the list. I'm not saying that is right, but at least until we have something official coming from the leaders of those political parties, if I know that I've done something wrong, I can only use my own conscience and say, comrades, I appreciate that you have nominated me, but because I still have some issues to deal with, may I please hold back until I've cleared this. So I'll use my own discretion in the absence of a directive from my own political party if I were to be nominated in political party X, for instance.
Well, Professor, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your insights with us. It's always much appreciated.